My in-laws were completely intoxicated, and despite the crowd around us whispering and exchanging glances, they didn't seem to care. They just kept shouting at me. Well, I guess it's too late now that you're already married. But if you want to be part of this family, you'd better show us you have enough money, they demanded loudly. Then, adding insult to injury, they said, yes, your dad's right. Make sure to give us $2,000 a month as a bonus. I stood there in complete shock, unable to process their audacity. How could they say such outrageous things at a wedding reception? My face turned pale as I stared at them, speechless. Before I could respond, my dad stepped in, taking the microphone away from them. Enough is enough. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves? He said, his voice filled with anger and disappointment. My name is Emily. I'm a 28-year-old office worker, and I'm currently engaged to Christopher, a 30-year-old man who is 2 years older than me. I met Christopher through a mutual friend who had been concerned about my single status. She thought it was time for me to meet someone, so she introduced us. After dating for about a year, Christopher proposed, and now we're preparing for our wedding. Growing up, I lost my mother at a very young age, which left a huge void in my life. My father raised me on his own, working tirelessly to provide for me. Thanks to his hard work, I never had to worry about much as a child, but losing my mom left a scar on my heart. Because of that, I became very protective of my emotions and cautious about opening up to others. I didn't date much, not since my school days, and for a long time I thought I might stay single forever. But then I met Christopher. At first, I didn't feel any romantic connection, even though he persistently asked me out. Christopher was kind, patient, and always treated me with respect. Over time, his sincerity broke through my emotional barriers, and I began to see him in a different light. Slowly, I opened my heart to him, and we started dating. He continued to show me how much he cared, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. As our relationship deepened, I realized how special Christopher was to me. I started imagining a future with him. One day, he proposed, and I couldn't have been happier to say yes. Christopher truly understands me, even the parts of myself I sometimes struggle with. He's always kind, supportive, and reassuring. Don't worry, he'd often say, if you're ever unsure about something, I'll be here until you feel better. I love you, Emily, and you can always count on me. Those words touched me deeply. His love and care melted away the doubts I once had about relationships. If Christopher was willing to dedicate his life to making me happy, then I wanted to do the same for him. When I shared the news of our engagement with my father, he was overwhelmed with joy. His eyes welled up as he said, Emily, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you. Dad, you're being so dramatic. I teased, laughing a little at his reaction. Well, he said, I've been worried for years that you might never get married. You didn't know I felt that way, did you? I shook my head, surprised. No, I had no idea you were concerned about that. Every father worries about his daughter, you know, he replied. Then, with a wide smile, he added, anyway, congratulations. Thanks, Dad, I replied, feeling a rush of gratitude. My father's heartfelt congratulations meant the world to me, especially since he had raised me on his own. The thought of our upcoming wedding filled me with emotion. I knew I would probably cry, but I was certain my dad would cry even more. He was already tearing up now. With that, Christopher and I dove headfirst into preparing for the wedding. Our lives became a whirlwind of activity. Both of us had demanding jobs, so weekdays were packed with work, and weekends were consumed by wedding plans. There was no time to rest. Our schedules were always packed. On the rare occasion we had a day off, we decided it was time to visit Christopher's parents. It would be my first time meeting them. Christopher had already met my father right after proposing to me. Initially, I'd planned to visit his parents shortly after, but their busy schedules and ours never aligned. After some time, we finally managed to arrange a visit. As we approached his parents' house, I started to feel nervous. Don't worry, my parents are very kind, Christopher said, sensing my anxiety. His reassuring words helped me relax a little. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. His mother answered the door. "Mom, I'm home," Christopher said with a warm smile. "Welcome home, Christopher. It's so good to see you," she replied cheerfully. Her tone was warm and inviting as she greeted her son. I stepped forward and introduced myself politely. "Nice to meet you. My name is Emily, and I'm Christopher's fiancée." Her demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, so you're Emily," she said. Her voice dropped, and the smile she had for Christopher disappeared. She gave me a once-over, her eyes cold and assessing, before leading us into the living room. Her chilly attitude lingered. Once we were seated, she wasted no time. "Emily, I'm curious. What do you bring to the table? Christopher is our treasure and our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him?" Her tone was more like an interrogation than a conversation. Her bluntness left me stunned. I hadn't expected such hostility from my future mother-in-law. Her sharp questions threw me off balance. "You're going to join our family, you know. Are you ready for that?" she pressed. I knew that marrying Christopher meant becoming part of his family, but this wasn't a royal family or a prestigious high-society clan. Why was I being grilled like this? It wasn't as if we'd planned to live with them after the wedding. Her questioning felt overbearing and unnecessary. As I struggled to find the right words, her impatience grew. "When I ask you a question, answer me right away." "You're so rude," she snapped. Her voice grew louder. "I'm asking if you're ready for this." Despite my nerves, I managed to stammer. I hope that Christopher and I will support each other in our marriage." Her reaction was immediate. "What a naive thing to say. You're not just supposed to support each other. Your job as a wife is to support Christopher. You don't even understand the basics," she criticized harshly. I felt humiliated, but before I could respond, Christopher's father, who had been sitting quietly next to her, intervened. "Honey, calm down," he said firmly, trying to diffuse the tension. Then he turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that, Emily. You must have been startled by my wife's words." His attempt to ease the situation brought a little relief, but the damage was already done. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of family I was about to marry into. He said this in an attempt to ease the tension. "It's all right," I replied, trying to remain calm. I told myself that his mother might simply be overprotective of her only son, perhaps acting out of nervousness and not thinking her words through. Just then, Christopher's brother walked into the room. His demeanor was calm and gentle, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief. But that feeling didn't last long. With a polite smile, he said something that completely blindsided me. "What my wife says is actually justified. What concerns me most is that you come from a single-parent family." I blinked in confusion.
"What do you mean by that?"
I asked, my voice steady but firm. "Well," he began, "being raised by just one parent doesn't have the best public image. We can't be entirely happy about someone with that background becoming the wife of our only son, can we?" I was stunned. "Hold on a minute," I said, refusing to let his comment slide. "What exactly is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked incredibly hard to raise me on his own, and I'm deeply grateful for the upbringing he gave me. I'm proud of him, and being raised in a single-parent household doesn't make me any less valuable." But despite my defense, they weren't done. "Since you were missing one parent, you probably never learned how to be a good wife, how to do housework and other things like that," they argued. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I responded, "Actually, I helped my father a lot with housework while growing up. I can cook pretty well, too. So please don't make such assumptions about me." My response seemed to fall on deaf ears. Christopher's brother ignored my words and finally made a statement that left me speechless. "I will allow you to marry Christopher, but in exchange, you must promise to devote yourself entirely to us, because we are Christopher's parents. Can you promise me that?" I was shocked.
"What?"
I managed to say. "Well," he continued, "since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you must understand what your duties will be, don't you?" Before I could reply, he carried on, dominating the conversation. I found myself with no opportunity to fully defend myself, as my in-laws had taken complete control of the discussion. That evening, as I reflected on what had happened, I decided to share my thoughts with Christopher. Christopher, I began, do your parents always speak to people like that? What about it? Christopher asked, seemingly unfazed by my concern. I hesitated. Well, the way your parents spoke to me, the things they said. Oh, really? He interrupted. They were just trying to make sure you're ready for marriage. I understand they're concerned about their son's future, I replied, but I feel like their comments were far too harsh. Why do you think that? They didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they've already given us their blessing to get married, so you shouldn't worry about it. His response left me feeling uneasy. Christopher didn't seem to grasp the issue, and worse, he appeared to side with his parents over me. It was troubling. Perhaps noticing my discomfort, he gave me a hug and said, Emily, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a little upset because their only son is getting married. It'll be fine, trust me. Though his words were meant to comfort me, they fell flat. It sounded like he was justifying their behavior rather than standing up for me. They just want what's best for us, he added. They want us to be as strong of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh. Really? I replied, unsure of what to say. Maybe he was right that his parents had high expectations for us, but even so, their comments about me being from a single-parent household felt unfair and unnecessary. I don't think it's right to belittle someone because of how they were raised. That doesn't define whether someone will make a good partner or not. In my heart, I knew this was our marriage, not theirs. Their approval or disapproval didn't matter as much as the bond between Christopher and me. With that thought, I decided not to dwell on their opinions too much. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. Guests filled the venue, including relatives, friends, colleagues, and even our bosses. I walked down the aisle with my father, the man who had raised me and supported me all my life. Christopher and I exchanged vows and rings, and the applause that followed was overwhelming. It was in that moment, standing beside Christopher, that I truly felt the reality of our marriage sinking in. I was happy, happier than I had ever been. As we moved into the reception hall, we were greeted by a joyful crowd. Videos of us played as part of the entertainment, adding to the celebratory atmosphere. It was a beautiful day filled with laughter and love, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. I spent time chatting with friends I hadn't seen in ages, and many people came up to congratulate us. Despite all the earlier tension with Christopher's parents, I felt glad I had chosen to marry him. I was happy we had decided to create a memorable day together. After the ceremony, we planned to officially register our marriage, making Christopher and me husband and wife. I cherished every moment, feeling truly happy as time seemed to fly by. Eventually, it was time for the final part of the event. Christopher, I, and both our sets of parents lined up to greet the guests. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Christopher's parents, standing beside us, were visibly unsteady on their feet. Their faces were flushed bright red. It was clear they had been drinking too much. A few relatives asked discreetly if they were all right, but we still needed to wrap up the ceremony. As the moderator handed the microphone to Christopher and me, his mother abruptly grabbed my hand away from his and started yelling at me like she was issuing a public challenge. Listen to me, Emily. After this wedding, you're going to devote yourself to us completely. Prepare yourself because we're going to test you really hard. Her dramatic outburst drew whispers and laughs from the guests, some of whom assumed it was a joke. But it wasn't over. Christopher's father grabbed the microphone next. Emily, don't you feel embarrassed wearing a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all, he said in a mocking tone. Then, as if encouraged by his words, Christopher's mother chimed in. That's right, dear. Someone should tell her the truth. The tone of the whispers among the guests changed quickly. Now there was a mix of shock and pity in the air. I glanced at Christopher, hoping he would intervene and stop his parents from further humiliating me. But instead, he looked indifferent. I can't do that, he said quietly. They aren't doing anything wrong. That was the moment I realized something painful and undeniable. Christopher would never stand up to his parents for me. He would never protect me from their cruel remarks or behavior. As the hall buzzed with murmurs, my in-laws, still drunk, continued to hurl insults at me. Well, It's too late now since you're already married, they said with a laugh. But if you're going to be part of this family, you need to prove you're capable. After you register your marriage at City Hall, you should give us a few $1,000s a month, and your entire bonus. Their words left me utterly shocked. I couldn't believe they would make such outrageous demands at our wedding reception. I stood there in stunned silence, feeling my face turn pale. Before I could react, my father, who had been watching everything, stepped forward and took the microphone from them. "Enough of this," he said firmly, though he still managed to keep a composed tone. "Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves?" Christopher's parents glared at my father, their expressions filled with anger and disdain. "Why are you interrupting us while we're talking?" they snapped. Then, they turned their insults toward him. "We knew this woman's father wasn't any good. Single parents are always no good." Their words made my blood boil. How dare they insult my father, a man who had sacrificed so much to raise me on his own? Despite their hostility, my father kept his cool and responded with quiet dignity. "You people are worse than I imagined," he said. "You even refuse to meet me because I'm a single father. And yet, I've always respected people, regardless of their circumstances. I never thought someone like you would have the privilege of working for President Scott, a man of such character and respectability." My father's words left the room in stunned silence. For the first time that day, it felt like someone had finally put Christopher's parents in their place. "I assumed his employees would be decent as well," my father continued, addressing the crowd. At that moment, my father-in-law's face grew very serious. How do you know President Scott?" he asked, his voice trembling. "My company works closely with him as a business partner," my father explained calmly. "More importantly, President Scott has been a close friend of mine for many years. And speaking of single parents, President Scott was raised solely by his mother. So, in your ignorance, you've just insulted not only me but also the president of the company you work for." The color drained from my in-laws' faces as they realized the severity of their words. My father-in-law fell to his knees in desperation. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please don't tell the president about this," he pleaded, his earlier bravado completely gone. The dramatic reversal in his demeanor drew laughter from the guests, some of whom began recording the scene on their phones. "No matter how much you apologize, you can't take back what you've said," my father replied sternly. He then turned to me, his expression softening. "Emily, do you want to go home with me?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. I took the microphone from Christopher's hand and faced the crowd. "Thank you all for the entertainment today, but there will be no marriage," I announced firmly. "To Christopher, his parents, and everyone here, I'll make sure to return all the money you contributed to this occasion." With that, I walked out of the reception hall with my father. As we left, I caught a glimpse of Christopher and his parents, looking completely dismayed. Their relatives, now realizing the magnitude of what had occurred, rushed over with worried expressions, trying to contain the chaos. Later, as I refunded the money to our guests, they expressed their support and praised me and my father for standing up for ourselves. Many said it was better that I wasn't taken advantage of by such toxic people. The fallout from the wedding fiasco spread quickly. Christopher's coworkers who attended the reception shared the story at his workplace, and soon, he became infamous for having overbearing, unreasonable parents. Worse yet, he was criticized for his weak character and inability to stand up for me. The humiliation led Christopher to resign from his job voluntarily. Meanwhile, word of the incident reached the president of my father-in-law's company. As a result, Christopher's father was demoted and transferred to a remote office in the countryside, far from any meaningful responsibilities. The disgrace didn't stop there. Christopher's family became ostracized by their relatives, who blamed them entirely for what happened. Although it was an unfortunate situation, I couldn't help but think they brought it upon themselves. Some consequences are unavoidable when you treat others so poorly. In the aftermath, I focused on building a stronger relationship with my father. We started spending more quality time together, and I gained a deeper appreciation for everything he had done for me over the years. One day, he sat me down for a serious conversation. Emily, are you interested in running the business? He asked, his tone filled with a mix of hope and seriousness. I hesitated. Do you mean? I started, unsure of where he was going with this. Why don't you work toward becoming the president of my company? He suggested. It was a monumental step, but his belief in my abilities inspired me. I'll do my best, I promised, feeling a combination of excitement and nervousness. I resolved to focus on excelling at work and proving to both myself and my father that I could take on such a responsibility. For the time being, I decided to put romantic relationships aside and channel all my energy into becoming a capable leader. Since then, I've immersed myself in learning everything I can about my father's business. The work is challenging, but it's also deeply fulfilling. I'm determined to seize this opportunity and make the most of it. Looking back on the wedding debacle, it's clear that Christopher's parents' behavior turned what should have been a beautiful celebration into a spectacle. Thankfully, I had the strength to walk away from a toxic situation, and now I'm focusing on building a better future for myself, one where I can thrive both personally and professionally. Since the marriage was never officially registered, Emily in this scenario, was spared from making a legally binding mistake. Free from any marital ties and the looming issues with difficult in-laws, I can now direct all my energy toward my career aspirations. It's a relief to know that out of such a chaotic situation, a clear path forward has emerged for me. Now, I look to the future with hope and excitement, particularly about the possibility of leading my father's company one day. This experience has taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and recognizing when to walk away from unhealthy relationships. I wish myself the best as I embark on this new chapter, focusing on growth and fulfillment. I also hope that anyone watching this story can take something meaningful from it, whether it's the importance of self-respect, the courage to make difficult decisions, or simply knowing when to prioritize your own happiness. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.